Welcome to the Memories of a Moonbird podcast, exploring life one story at a time. Hello friends, I'm Daniel Sherrill. Today on the show, born and raised in Texas, he fell in love with photography, art, and music at an early age. He went on to study cinematography and anthropology at Boston University, and over the course of his career so far has photographed and lensed projects all over the world. He's traveled to a multitude of places, from the extremes of the Himalayas to the war-torn countries of Afghanistan, the West Bank, and Palestine. While he has an impressive list of commercial clients like Esteé Lauder, Delta Airlines, Stella Artois, Dodge, Dior, Adidas, and Samsung, just to name a few, his real passion is for the narrative pieces he works on that focus on social issues and political struggle worldwide. He says his goal as a director of photography is to, quote, create images that will affect the viewer on a subliminal level. Please welcome cinematographer David McFarland. David, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. So I'd love to know, first and foremost, what was it like growing up in Texas, and what was little David like?
Growing up in Texas was cool. Luckily, I grew up in the middle of a really big city, Dallas, Texas. So I kind of had everything culturally sort of at my disposal, which was really nice. But yeah, it was good to grow up there, but I kind of took off right after high school, kind of started exploring the world.
And is Dallas, in your opinion, a pretty liberal, arts-oriented place?
Dallas is much more liberal and much more arts-oriented than I think the average person would kind of realize. Dallas has a lot of progressive thinkers and a lot of money in the arts.
And do you go back every now and again?
I go back to Dallas fairly often. My whole family's still there. Dallas isn't a place that I, would gravitate towards just on my own. But my family being there brings me back pretty frequently.
That's great. So was there something in particular growing up that drew you to cinematography?
I think growing up, I was just really into creativity in general. My first love has been was music and playing drums specifically, and so I think that was my first that was my first passion, and it kind of shifted into cinematography when I was in college.
And was there a particular, now you've done all this incredible work as a DP on commercial shoots and things like that, but your work overseas, I'd love to hear how you got into that in the first place and what drew you to work in some of these places.
I've always really been fascinated by culture. The way people live and the cultural trends that they live under and the decisions they make because of that. It's really has always really fascinated me. And so when I was in school, I went to school in Boston. And when I was in school there, I ended up kind of dividing my time between studying film and studying anthropology. And within that, I kind of focused on Middle Eastern politics. For some reason, I've always kind of gravitated towards that part of the world. But when I embarked on a career as a DP, I kind of made it part of my mission to sort of photograph things all over the world as a way for me to get to experience the anthropological side of my interests.
That's fascinating. Now, have you ever been in life-risking situations doing this?
I've ended up working in a handful of places that are have a lot of conflict. Afghanistan was one. That was kind of the first place I ended up that was dodgy, and it was a really crazy experience. And we certainly ended up in some situations that were a little like you would expect in an active war zone. But the movie we were making, it was a film called The Black Tulip. It was 2009, and it was a female Afghan director making a film that she felt very strongly about, and I was very much on board to do that. And so it all seemed kind of worth it.
Something I'm really curious about is, in America specifically, we see a certain message presented by the news media of what it's like in these other countries, but we never really get to hear about what the everyday people are like. And you've been there on the streets, in the trenches with the populations of these countries. So can you tell me, what is it like to walk around and be around the Afghani people, and what are they like?
I always find it really, really interesting to just be kind of at street level in whatever city or town or village or wherever I am. I was really lucky to spend time in Afghanistan in a really interesting time in their political history. I was there the first time in the fall of 2009 when Karzai had just been elected, and it was a really volatile time. And it was really interesting for me to get to kind of witness it and experience it on the ground level with Afghans and with people who this is their home and this is their reality. Getting to make a feature film in a third world country or a place like Afghanistan means, you end up working with people for a few months, and you end up getting to see the real them and the real work ethic and the real culture. And so, I feel very, very lucky about that.
What do you think is one of the biggest things you took away from that experience from the people themselves?
I guess so. The big takeaway is always like open up, gaining perspective, and also maybe having an appreciation for kind of what you have versus what people don't have, or the kind of freedoms that you're afforded and the kind of strife that other people have to just live in every day.
It's actually one of my other questions I was going to ask you is, do you find any struggle being someone who's been around the world and has seen some of the darker parts of humanity and then coming home and hearing people complain about, some very first world problem?
Yeah, I think I think we all are, we all get very accustomed to the bubble we create around ourselves. I think we all get very used to a certain level of comfort, and I get that. It can be a little troubling sometimes if coming back from a place where you go spend some time in India and you see how a big portion of the planet lives, and then you come back to Los Angeles or New York or London or something, and you see how a small portion of the planet lives, and when that smaller portion starts to complain about what they have or don't have, it can be a little hard to stomach sometimes. But I'm guilty of it myself. I certainly have a lot of luxuries in my life that I could certainly live without. I had a really weird experience coming back from Afghanistan that first time, where I ended up going to London, and I remember going to Oxford Circus really early in the morning to buy new shoes because mine were just trashed from being out in the streets for so long. And I remember, I think I was like in H&M or something, and I had kind of a little bit of a breakdown where it all came like flooding back in, and just the reality of the situation that, these people, I was able to fly away and just leave these people behind that were, have a really bad situation over there.
How do you think we can affect global change to try and make the world better in all these other places and I know it takes a long time to affect real change, but what do you think people can do?
I think the thing that affects change the most on a global level is perspective. I think once people's perspective starts to shift on what the reality of the world is, then I think there's a fighting chance at some positive change. But until people get out of their bubble and until people start to empathize with how the rest of the world works, I think that you're just going to see a greater and greater divide between the haves and the have-nots. And I think as resources start to run out and agrarian societies start to kind of collapse a little bit and pushes towards more urban civilization starts to rise and water resources start to deplete, I think it's going to take a lot of people trying to work together to make sure we all stay on this planet together. So I think it's about people changing their perspective and starting to look at things on a much more global level. And I think things like this pandemic that we're experiencing right now hopefully will start to urge people in that direction.
If you could have your magic superpower and see the world 100 years from now, where do you think we will be in 2120?
Looking forward to the future, it's anyone's guess. I would like to think that we've kind of made some real changes in the way we treat our planet and the longevity of the decisions we've made. We start to become more realistic about the outcome. I'm hopeful that we start to listen to the youth and the people who are very, very loudly asking us to do something. So I would hope that that's the case. But right now the sad thing is that it seems like things like nationalism are very much on the rise. It seems like We have some people in office in this country and in other countries that are really not thinking in terms of the long term. They're thinking in terms of their own,
Agreed.
presidencies or dictatorships or reign or whatever it is. And so I'm really hoping that in 100 years we can see a moment where a lot of people with these trains of thoughts that are not good for the planet maybe start to die off, and we get a younger generation that's starting to like actually take the reins.
And flying cars, man. I mean, I want my flying car.
Yeah, well, of course. I mean, there's going to be insane and amazing technological advances, which are completely exciting. I met a guy the other day who has a robotic arm, and I sat and talked with him, and it was amazing to watch it. I shook his hand. It was amazing.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So in all your travels, where's your favorite place so far that you've been?
Oh man, I've been really lucky that I'm pretty good at manifesting like places I want to go and having it happen. I'm really fascinated with North Africa and the Middle East. I just did a shoot in Saudi Arabia in January. That was pretty amazing, getting to spend some time over there. I've worked in Morocco a bit, and I really, really love Morocco. I'm dying to go back and film somewhere there.
It's very high on my bucket list.
Morocco's amazing. I mean, Morocco's amazing visually. The Moroccans are cool. It's like very, it's a really good country for people to go from the United States who maybe haven't gone to a Muslim country before, an Islamic Republic. It's like, it's one of these places that feels really exotic, but it's like also, you kind of get the best of every world.
Did you get to go up to the Atlas Mountains at all when you were there?
I did, yeah. I did. I did a job there. The last time I was there was, I don't know, 5 years ago, and I did a print and motion job there, and we were traveled all over. We were in Marrakesh and Ouarzazate. We traveled through the Atlas Mountains, and then we were way out in the Sahara, down by out by Algeria. It was cool. It was a really, really cool job. Really amazing country.
That's awesome. What's the hardest part of being a cinematographer for you personally?
I think the hardest part about being a cinematographer for me is just the fact that it's just kind of nonstop. I mean, thankfully, like I stay really busy, so I'm very lucky. But I think it's hard for me to like stop and kind of like enjoy it because it's kind of like one thing after the next, and it's also hard for me to like, maintain connections with friends. I mean, it's in some respects, my world is really huge because I'm kind of all over the place and I see people all the time. In other respects, I mean, I split my time between New York and LA, and it's like, I'm kind of here and there and kind of nowhere. So it's like, that can be a little tricky.
At the time of recording this, of course, we are very much deep in the coronavirus pandemic. How has this affected you? Obviously, you're not traveling much right now.
Well, I mean, this pandemic that's happening right now has affected me like it's affected everybody in that I'm landlocked right now. So I'm kind of glued to the couch. My work world has stopped completely. And I haven't really thought about that too much, which is good on a lot of levels.
By the nature of what you've done with your life and all your travels, you have dealt with a multitude of different cultures. Have you ever had to deal with something that was actually a particular challenge in some of the places that you've worked?
Yeah. I mean, I think inherently whenever you're getting off the beaten path or you're getting outside of your own comfort zone, you're going to a different country. I think that the whole thing is challenging. I think that you're kind of someone who's either into those challenges or you're not into those challenges. And if you're not into those challenges, you're probably not going to be someone who travels that often. Mm-hmm. But for me, I mean, I've chosen to do a lot of work in countries that don't have a lot of stability, and not only that, don't really have a lot of film infrastructure. So, going and making a film in Ramallah in the West Bank and Palestine is kind of like, going to make a film in a place that just really has no kind of idea of how to do it, or doesn't have a model of how a production is set up. I wouldn't say they don't have an idea of how to do it. Let me rephrase that. But so I think that inherently those are challenges, and then within that, it's like you're definitely gonna have cultural challenges, work ethic challenges. Of course, like some people practice religion differently, and that can affect like how or when they work. But I think that those things, like, I love it. I find it really fascinating. I've made a handful of films now in languages that I don't speak, with indigenous crews that I don't communicate with very easily. And I think those challenges like yield some really frustrating situations sometimes, but often some very rewarding outcomes photographically and just like emotionally.
Have you found it easy to communicate with a crew or with a director or a vision or whoever's working on the project? Let's say most of the people working on it don't speak English. Through the media of camera and visual expression, by creating these shots and shooting these scenes, are you able to still communicate with visual storytelling without being able to speak the language?
I would say my case, most often the time when I'm working in places that I don't speak the language, or working with crews where there's a big language barrier, I would say we find a common language very quickly. Certainly, I mean, I did a film in India a few years ago called A Sweet Requiem, and the crew, I was the only Westerner. The crew is entirely Indian and Tibetan. My camera department specifically was all Indian, so they all spoke Hindi, and that's it. But we were able to communicate really, really well and very quickly. But that kind of makes sense because we're around a camera, and there's a lot of terminology kind of like defies language because it's just specific terminology to whatever company we were using, an Arri, Alexa. So maybe, the word Alexa is the same in Hindi, but we were able to find a common ground really quickly. And I think that it kind of intensified our relationship, and it was in a really good way. And it was a lot of like,
that's cool.
Yeah. I mean, my focus puller was a guy named Varun Kumar. And he just like had like a really amazing smile and a really like soft sense in his face. And I just really like, I don't speak Hindi. He doesn't speak English. But we got along really well. We worked together for like 2.5 months together.
That's great.
Yeah.
So for more than a decade, you've been involved in doing all this wonderful work. And I'm curious, do you think you've changed because of it? And if so, how?
Well, I think I'm definitely not the same person I was when I started working as a cinematographer. And I think that, like anything in life, I mean, you're going to learn from experience, and you're going to apply lessons learned to your life. So ultimately you're going to grow. I would say for me, I mean, I've learned a lot of really important life lessons through my work as a cinematographer.
Would you care to share one or two of them?
Yeah, I mean, an example of the kind of lesson I've learned as a DP is like, for me, I'm in a position of authority and of leadership on a film set. And for me, a big part of what I do is trying to inspire the people around me to like try and capture my vision, or mine and the director's vision, or my interpretation of the director's vision. So a lot of the lessons I've learned over the years have been on how to deal with people, not so much photographic lessons. And of course, I've learned a lot of photographic and lighting lessons as well. But the ones I find really interesting, and the ones that tend to like seep into other parts of my life, are the lessons that I've learned about how to deal with people and how to kind of how to approach different situations. And that becomes exponentially intensified when you throw in a language barrier or a cultural difference or a religious difference, and or you're in a conflict area. So I find those lessons always really interesting and really impactful.
If you had unlimited resources and money, what's your dream project that you'd love to do?
I mean, I would probably do like a political thriller set in the Middle East, or set all over the world. I'm really attracted to projects that kind of grab the kinetic energy of places. So I like the idea of going to places with a lot of kinetic energy, like Jakarta. Or
when you say political thriller, are you speaking, feature film, or are you speaking documentary?
Oh, no. Yeah, I feature film.
Cool.
Yeah, I mean, I work specifically in narrative and commercial. Like, I really, really appreciate documentaries, and I'm not saying I would not shoot documentaries, but that's not really what I do right now.
So if the next James Bond script came around, it was a politically thriller-based movie, would that qualify? Or
yeah, I mean, I would definitely shoot like a big franchise like the Bond stuff. I mean, that would be super cool. I mean, but that's only awarded to like, people that are a little bit further down the road than I am, or but that would be, if my career went that direction, that would be fantastic. But right now, I mean, what I've done in my career so far is I've kind of killed two birds with one stone. I mean, I've kind of like decided places I want to explore for me, both photographically and just like out of my own interest. And then I've somehow found a way to kind of get attached to projects in these places, and then those, then I kind of get to experience that. So I've been pretty lucky.
If for some reason in a magical world you could only shoot either still images or video images, which would you choose?
I mean, I think I would choose motion. I mean, I find still photography incredibly impactful. And I mean, almost like more impactful than cinematography in a lot of respects. But for me, the way I work and the language I work in requires motion. I mean, the way I work and the goal of mine is always to try and create a kind of a subliminal language for the viewer to kind of grasp onto, even though maybe they hopefully don't really understand what it is that we're saying visually all the time. It can evoke a certain train of thought or emotion. And with that in mind, that works. I mean, I know how to do that best in motion picture. And with that, I mean, the tools I use at my disposal are, camera movement and camera stabilization, and as well as things that apply to still photography like perspective and depth of field and all the other traits as well.
Do you have separate favorite films from both a technical perspective and just a human perspective of like, I love The Princess Bride because it's just a feel-good movie, but from a DP perspective, I love this movie because of what they accomplished?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I as a viewer watch films for a lot of different reasons. I mean, some I watch because I love cinematography, and the cinematographer or the cinematography in a film is something I'm really interested in. There's other films that I watch that are not for the photography, and it's more for the emotion or the story. For me, like visually, the stuff that I really, really love the most is like definitely the Bertolucci-Storaro combo, like The Conformist and Last Tango in Paris and Sheltering Sky. I love that's a Morocco film. And obviously like Apocalypse Now was a big one for me. I also love Kieslowski. I love Sławek Idziak, his Polish cinematographer who shot Blue and Double F of Veronique and a short film about killing. That stuff I could just watch forever, and all the Wong Kar-wai stuff, like just the world that Wong Kar-wai created.
And how do you feel about things like Eternal Sunshine, The Spotless Mind, or Stranger Than Fiction, some of the hyper reality stuff? I
don't really have a strong opinion about either of those films. I saw both those films in the theater. Haven't seen either of those films since. I remember there was something kind of very lo-fi about Eternal Sunshine that people really dug at the time. I wasn't that into it, but the thing is, like, cinematography is like any other art form. It's there's kind of something for everybody, and
sure,
and it's a really vast medium. So I mean, we all have our very specific tastes. Mine are very specific to my own experience.
Oh, that's cool. One of my favorite questions to ask someone actually is, and it's applicable right now. Let's say you're at home and you have the flu and you don't feel good, and you're sitting on the couch on a Sunday afternoon and you just want that movie to watch that you feel good. What would that be for you?
I mean, what would the feel good film be?
Yeah, something you just like, I love this movie. It's so fun. And you just put it on because it makes you feel better when you're homesick.
Let me think about that. I mean, I would say like, the film I always come back to is Blue by Krzysztof Kieslowski, but it's not a super feel-good movie. It's just a film that like I love the world it's set in. I kind of want to crawl into that world. Yeah, but I mean, I'm trying to think of like just like I don't know. My tastes are pretty dark.
That's okay.
I like The Princess Bride, but I don't really watch it. I mean, I would say, Baraka is one.
Oh yeah, and Samsara.
Yeah, Baraka is one of those films that I can just turn on and just like fall into. But it affects me on a really heavy level. I mean, Baraka is one of those films that like got me started on the path that I'm on. I can't lie, and I'm sure it's done the same for a lot of people. But I mean, I ended up in film school because I couldn't figure out what to study. I mean, I was going to go to music school, and then I realized I was just too punk rock, and I was like, I don't know how to read music, and that's not why I want to go play music anyway. And anyway, I ended up in film school, and I ended up registering really late, like the first day of my junior year late, and they didn't have any classes available. But what they did have in film school, but what they did have available and what would count towards my major was photojournalism classes. So that's what I started taking. Yeah. And I had a photojournalism teacher who showed me Baraka, or through hearing me talk, recommended I see Baraka, and I watched it, and that kind of started my whole thing with like film and travel.
That's cool.
I mean, I was already studying anthropology. But I kind of saw someone putting it, Ron Frick. I saw those guys putting that, two of my interests together on a really crazy level. And that really got me going. So I would say like Baraka is one of those films that really like, I always come back to.
Of all the places you've been in the world, is there a place that you personally think, if a person gets the chance, like where would you recommend anybody go if they only take one big international trip in their life? Where's somewhere you think people should try to get to?
I think it's important for everyone to just to leave the country they're from. I think that first and foremost, everyone should just get a passport and just leave the shores that you are kind of caged in by. I think first and foremost, just leave the country. But then, I think it depends on kind of where you're from. But I think in the United States, I would urge people to go to an Islamic country. I think that is really, really, really important. I think that the way the human psyche works is there's the fear of the unknown is a real thing. And I think that there's such a great divide between the Western world and the Islamic world, and it's a shame. I think that both cultures are really interesting and beautiful and actually share a lot of the same tenets, but unfortunately, like a lot of people pass judgment on both sides, looking both directions, not having any firsthand experience for themselves. So for me personally, what do I, David McFarland, wish for the world? I would hope that both cultures start to understand each other a little more, and so I would hope that people from this country go to a place like Morocco, go to a place where it is an Islamic republic, and you have to adhere to the rules and respect the religious beliefs of this culture, but at the same time, it's really beautiful and very accepting and very open. So I would hope that people open their mind in that sense.
Is there somewhere in the world that you haven't been yet that you really want to go? Where would you next manifest?
I'm trying to manifest Western Africa, like Ivory Coast. That would be really amazing. I was in talks about doing a movie over there, and hopefully still am, but we'll see what's going on with all this stuff. But I'm really dying to go to West Africa. I'm really interested in Russia. I've never been to Russia.
A lot of the work you've mentioned is Middle East oriented and North Africa oriented. I'm curious, why such a draw to that part of the world as opposed to, I'm in love with Europe, or I'm in love with, Asia or New Zealand? What drew you to that area that is so passionate for you?
At an early age, I thought I wanted to be an archaeologist. So I remember Indiana Jones, and I remember in the first one when there's some like late afternoon shots when they're in Egypt and they're on this dig, and I was like, I want to go there. I want to be in that. And I don't know. I think I've always been fascinated just everything about it aesthetically, like Moorish architecture. Really, I'm drawn to it. Middle Eastern music. Really, I just tonally, I really love. It always seemed kind of so exotic to me, and also just the first time I was in a country where I heard the call for prayer, it really made me feel like I was alive, in the sense that I felt like I was really far away.
What was that experience like?
Yeah, it was like one of the first times I had worked really far away. I was shooting something in Malaysia in the early 2000s, and I went over to Malaysia. It was my first time in Southeast Asia, and I didn't realize that Malaysia is an Islamic country. And so I landed there, and all of a sudden I was kind of confused. I was expecting Buddhism, which there is a lot of, but I would you would see a lot of the population is covered, and you'd hear the call for prayer, and it was really confusing to me. I was surprised that it spread that far.
And
through
what
the
does
world.
the call for prayer sound like?
It's literally, the imam calling the people to prayer. So it comes out of the minarets, and often it's like a monotone, but it's someone singing the Quran. And I mean, I wish I knew more about it, but I mean, the way I'm explaining it is someone's probably going to say I said it wrong somewhere, but yeah, basically it's what you hear. It's like you hear it early in the morning, you hear it late in the afternoon. It's calling people to the mosque to pray.
Now, are you a religious person yourself?
No, I'm not a religious person myself, in that I'm not someone who goes to a place and kneels down before something. I mean, I'm a person who I believe in faith, and I certainly believe in karma, and I also believe if you want to believe in something, believe in it. But I find religion to be something really, 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 really fascinating. It's also such a driving force on this planet. I also find it personally very archaic, where people can, kill other people based on some abstract views of an ancient text.
Yeah.
For me, I don't really like that. But I'm along for the ride on this planet, and I'm very curious how it works. And religion is a big part of how and why this planet works. And so for that, I'm really fascinated. So while I'm not a religious person, for me as a person of faith, I'm someone who's very interested in religion as a reality on this planet. Very interested. And I find it very beautiful. I find like Catholic Mass, I find it really visually very interesting. I find mosques very, very, very beautiful. I've spent a lot of time all over Jerusalem. I find it fascinating.
Do you have a main goal as an artist?
I'm trying as an artist and as just a person with my own agenda on this planet. I mean, I'm trying to create a compelling body of work. I want to help tell stories that open people's perspectives, and maybe have someone sit with an issue for a couple hours that they wouldn't know anything about, or give the time to, but maybe they walk away from the theater caring about the Tibetan cause, or relating to, a guy who's assimilating back into his refugee camp after being a political prisoner, or people who are rising up against a force of people that are trying to take their rights away. I mean, these are stories that like I want to tell, and that I've been lucky enough to be a part of thus far. And I think that a lot of these stories are based on things like religion and persecution based on religion. And I think that while there's so many beautiful aspects about people's individual faith, and there's so many great things about having kind of like an ancient culture still be relevant, that you find in religion, I find that wonderful. But the thing that I find that so both scary and also a little bit curious is just that so many wars are based on belief in faith, which is something that like you have to take a leap of just to have faith in general. So it's like, so that to me, I find really, really, really sad, but also really, really, really interesting as well as a driving force on the planet.
David, it's time to talk about one of my favorite subjects on the podcast, which is food. Woohoo! I'm just curious, with all the places that you've traveled in your life so far, have you had any great culinary experiences, or what's your food experience been like traveling abroad?
Food is an interesting thing for me when traveling. I actually don't eat meat. I was a vegetarian for, 7 or 8 years, starting like 25 years ago. I eat fish now. But a lot of times when I travel, certainly when I travel to countries that maybe are not as clean as the one I'm from, I a lot of times just keep it vegetarian. I'm pretty strict with what I eat and don't eat. I really don't like to get sick. Like everybody, no one likes to get sick.
Yeah.
But the worst thing, I got really sick on a movie in Mexico one time, and trying to make a film while throwing up, it's not good. That being said, I've been pretty lucky to have some amazing meals. I spent some time in Vietnam, and we were in the Mekong Delta, and they were catching fish and kind of pan frying them right in front of us. It was pretty amazing. And I mean, all the Middle Eastern food I really love.
You mentioned India, and I wanted to ask you about it. I've never been, but I have family that have been, and they've told me some stories about it's a very strong smelling country. There's just aromas and everything from good to bad smells much more fragrant than, say, walking around the United States. Do you agree?
Man, India is just an assault on the senses in every way imaginable. And the smell is one aspect of that. I love India, but India's definitely not for the faint of heart in terms when it comes to like, well, India's like one of the most over the top places on the planet in terms of just how it's in your face it is. It's like, it's really loud. It's like that's really polluted. There's people everywhere. The level of homelessness is staggering. It's just incredibly dirty compared to Western standards. I mean, just everyone, there's a million cars and everyone's honking. It's just, it's intense. And India is one of these places I think you either love it or hate it.
And you love it.
I don't think you're in the middle. I think, you're either like, I love India or like, get me that fuck out of here.
Now, did you travel in different parts of the country outside the cities, or did you stay mostly in the metropolitan areas?
I was in India in early 2017 for the first few months of 2017, or the spring of 2017. And I was in Delhi. I was shooting a film called The Sweet Requiem, which is made by a directing husband and wife team. And we were in Delhi for a couple weeks, and then we went up to the Himalayas. We were in Delhi prepping for a couple weeks, and then we were up in the Himalayas for a month, and then we're down in Delhi for another couple months. Yeah, so I kind of was in and out of the cities, and then up in the mountainous regions.
I've heard some of the outside the city areas of India, up in the mountains and the south and stuff, are just extraordinarily beautiful.
Yeah, I was always in the north, so I never went. I was in Kashmir, like up in the very, very north, Ladakh. Which is a very, it's like the kind of tip, it's like at the very top of the diamond, it's, Pakistan and China, the Pakistani and Chinese border with India. But yeah, no, it's amazing. I mean, it's like the Himalayas were spectacular and just, insane. I mean, it really puts you in your place. You feel pretty tiny out there.
If you had to give your one piece of advice or kind of your general philosophy, David McFarland's kind of view of what life is really all about, what do you think that is?
I think my whole thing is I think we have a finite amount of time on this planet. And for me, I have just a lot of curiosity about seeing it and experiencing it. And so for me, I think I kind of live on sort of like an experiential level. And I've been really lucky that I get to live that way. But that's sort of my philosophy is all just about like gaining perspective. And gaining perspective through experience. I mean, of course, gaining perspective through education and all of these things. But I really am very passionate about being in people's homes and being in people's villages and seeing what a refugee camp is like and being in a slum and feeling a conflict. I find it really like it evokes all sorts of emotions. It can be really upsetting. It can be really gratifying. It can be really impactful on so many levels. I mean, one crazy thing for me that I've experienced more than once is being in a really crazy situation, like being in a refugee camp, and really at the moment of feeling like I can't believe these people have nothing, seeing the human spirit come through, and I often witness it with children where you're in a place that has seen a lot of violence or has just like the lowest economy ever. But you see these kids playing in the rubble and just like you see like the joy in their face or just the way they're like learning. And that can be really uplifting. I mean, not to shed light on like the trials they have to go through just on a day by day basis, but it can be a really amazing thing just to see human spirit kind of like just rising above everything.
Well, that's beautiful. Thank you. David, the last thing I usually do with all my podcast people is play a fun little game. I have a thing here called 299 Philosophical and Life Questions with Moonbird. I've collected 299 cool, fun, and poignant questions. You get to pick two numbers. I'm going to read you those questions randomly, and if you want to answer them, you can. You can always pass or skip as well.
Okay, cool.
What are your two numbers between 1 and 299?
11 and 271.
All right, 11 and 271. Number 11, what is the best compliment you've ever received?
Let me see. I mean, I think the best compliment I've ever received is come in the form, and it's come a couple times, thankfully, but it's usually after I've worked with someone where they feel like I've maybe taught them something. And that specifically happens when I end up working in places that don't have a film infrastructure already built in. And what that means is that people don't really have a place to learn. So for me, I went to film school, and I was very lucky to get to go to film school, but I really learned the majority of what I learned about what I do, I learned right outside of school, which is when I started to work on like independent productions and commercials. And right there, I was basically like at the disposal of, at the people in charge, and they taught me a lot, and I was very fortunate to have people show me the way. And so I try to do that when I'm working in countries like, if I, work in the West Bank, they don't have a film, they don't have cinematographers who live there. So, you find yourself in position to really like help people and help educate people. And I think it always makes me feel really good when people recognize that, or when people say like, man, you really just taught me a lot. So, I would say that's the biggest compliment for me.
Very cool. And finally, number 27, if you had to be one cartoon character, which would you choose?
I would definitely be Animal, the drummer, for sure.
Nice.
I mean, I am a drummer, but yeah, for sure, that's the cartoon character.
David McFarland, it has been a real pleasure to talk with you. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Cool, man. Thank you so much.
Can't wait to see what beautiful imagery you bring us next. And seriously, stay safe and have a great day.
Excellent.
Friends and listeners, if you'd like to check out some of David's incredible work, head on over to his website at davidmcfarlanddp.com. That's DavidMcFarlanddp.com. And hey, if you like what you're hearing on this show, I'd certainly appreciate your support. I'm on Patreon at patreon.com/Moonbird. That's patreon.com/Moonbird. And if you'd like even more Moonbird in your life, and hey, who wouldn't? Head on over to memoriesofamoonbird.com or visit me on social media at Memories of a Moonbird. Stay safe, everybody.